Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz, a show where we discuss happenings in this, the most fertile spot on the planet for new ideas. I'm your host, Seth Shostak. And tonight, a new way to get about town. You know, with traffic snarling like a rabid dog out there, you might want to consider new ways to get from where you are to where you want to be. And one of those ways might be to use personalized transportation, because after all, if it's personalized, maybe you could avoid the intermediate stops and the annoying passengers in the seat next to you, because there won't be any. Well, we'll be talking about the future and the practicality of personalized rapid transit with my guests, and let me introduce those to you. To my left, Ron, we're going to call you Rob all night. Ron Swenson. Ron is an engineer, founder of Swenson Solar, which designs and installs solar electric system. Also the founder of the International Institute of Sustainable Transportation. Ron, welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you here. And next to Ron is Mike Kasperzak. Mike is a Mountain View City Councilman, now on your fourth term, right?
That's right.
Former mayor and an attorney and a mediator. Mike, always good to have you on the show.
It's great to be back, Seth.
All right, let's get right down to it. Ron, let's begin with you. You've been working with some folks in Uppsala, Sweden, right, on a technology that can beat the rush hour headache. Tell me what this is.
Well, personal rapid transit, as you mentioned a few minutes ago here, involves being able to go from your start to your destination without stopping, comparing to a bus or a train where when everybody else stops, you have to stop too. This gives you a chance to get off to the side, go to your destination in a much more rapid fashion.
What, I mean, a taxi does
like
that?
Like a taxi, yeah.
Oh, right, okay, but this is
an
not
automated taxi, and it's on a fixed guideway, and it's elevated so that you don't interfere with the rest of traffic.
Okay, so you're talking about a system that has an elevated guideway, sort of like a monorail, right? Mm-hmm. And you have a little, instead of a monorail train, monorails typically can carry maybe 100 people or more. You have small conveyances, small.
It could be the size of a sports car, in other words, in terms of 2 people, or it could be like a van at the outside. So somewhere between 2 passengers to maybe 12, but most people are looking at 4 or 5, something in that range.
And you can individualize your trip. You get into this thing, you tell it where you want to go. I want to go to that spot over there, and it goes there without stop.
Exactly.
All right, well now, you presented this to the City Council of Mountain View, and including Mike here, who's known sometimes as the Podcar Mayor. Did I get that?
Podcar Mayor.
Podcar Mayor. I take it you take that as a compliment.
I do. Okay. I do indeed.
Return of the pod people. So what was the reaction to the City Council? I mean, what did they say?
Well, you know, interestingly, in Mountain View, the City Council has endorsed already the concept of personal rapid transit as a possible means of transportation in the city. When I specifically brought up the concept of Podcars with relation to the general plan and housing in the North Bay Shore, didn't go over very well, mostly because it had to do with housing in the North Bay Shore. But the council generally has been very supportive of the technology. The downside is that there are very few systems that are really available to go out and kick the tires and buy. Everything is still in development. And that's the real problem. There's 2 operating systems now, and neither really meets the needs of Mountain View.
Well, what are the needs of Mountain View? I mean, I can imagine the obvious, and that is take people from Caltrain Station down to the Googleplex, for example.
Exactly.
Or maybe just down Shoreline in general.
Right.
That kind of thing. But where else would you want this?
Well, I think to start out, a circulator within the North Bay Shore, including over to the NASA campus, maybe to the light rail station at Ellis Street, and up to the transit center. In a more vital system, It might go down California to the new San Antonio shopping center. And in 20, 25 years, maybe we get rid of bus rapid transit on El Camino, and we have a spine up El Camino of PRT that just pulls off to Google and to Facebook and to the ballpark at Santa Clara and to Genentech when you get up to South City. I mean,
at the moment, this is a system that's being sort of pitched as something that could be contained within Mountain View.
correct.
Okay, so that Mountain View has to be involved. Presumably, this is self-funding. I mean, it pays for itself. Ron, does it pay for itself?
Yes, it can. Now, we don't have a whole lot of experience to go by, as Mike just pointed out, but I think that it's pretty clear that federal funding and municipal funding is becoming more and more difficult. And the people who are working in this technology along with us are finding that they can finance with private money for the greater part. Now, I'm not saying that it will always be like that or that it would be that way in the very beginning, because you do have to have a starting point. But I think the key thing is that we can establish not just a corridor here or a corridor there, but we can have a broad mesh network, in fact. And Silicon Valley is all about networking. So I think this is a place where a network for people could be built as well as a network for packets.
Now, I'll point out something that I think you know and most of our viewers will know as well. Every transportation innovation in this country has required subsidy, right? And they still get subsidized. Every form of transportation gets it. People rail about, so to speak, rail about Amtrak, right? But on the other hand, the highways are subsidized, the airlines, everybody's subsidized. Right. So the fact that it might need some public money would not be breaking new ground, but presumably it would cover its operating costs, is what you're saying?
Well, yes, and for another thing is that because you can get from where you started to where you want to land up without having to stop along the way, you're actually going to have a better transportation system that can perform faster, finally, than the automobile. In other words, you could start out with a Ferrari on one end of town, and I get on this PRT system, I'll beat you, because you have to stop at the lights, and I don't. This system goes up over the traffic from source to destination without stopping. That's really critical. And it comes back to what I said a moment ago. It's the offline station that makes that possible. You get off, and that's your destination. The other guys keep right on going.
I think one of the things about the cost factors too is with a system like this, you know, if you build a road, you build a light rail station, you've got to acquire right away. One of the interesting things with most of the systems that Ron and I have been looking at, you mount them on what are essentially sturdier light poles. So they mount over the existing right-of-way, over the road, over the sidewalk. And so you don't have to spend billions of dollars buying up land if you can reach an agreement with the municipality to hang these over the existing right-of-way.
Well, that's something I want to ask a little bit about, because I think that's the point. Well, I mean, light rail can run down the streets too, but on the other hand, it takes space there, either that or it shares the streets, in which case you kind of defeat the purpose of having a dedicated right-of-way.
Right.
But, you know, history suggests that when you put elevated structures down streets, people don't like it. I mean, think of the Bowery in New York. You know, it kind of depressed real estate values. The monorail in Sydney, Australia, right? You don't want to be a storefront underneath that monorail structure. And I don't know how big a footprint this thing would have, but at stations, it's going to be pretty big, because you need to have the tracks to go around the main, you know, the main line, as it were, that kind of thing. I mean, what's the reaction to that? And can you just build that on an existing sidewalk or street?
There's a number of manufacturers. There's a company based over at Moffett Field called Skytran that is working on a system. And they've actually got a very low visually impact system. The stations are very concise, even with wheelchair access. The guideways are way less impressive than even the Seattle monorail, which is, you know, just this big, huge chunk of concrete. There certainly will be some probably pretty substantial visual impact, you know, going down streets or going down over a sidewalk. And that hasn't really been tested anywhere yet. That's another one of the problems. There are a couple of systems out there. There's one at Heathrow built by Ultra PRT, and it's basically cars on a road, but they're automated, sort of like autonomous vehicles, but they run on a track, and the track is 2 lanes wide, and that is clearly like an elevated roadway. But a single guideway, it's one direction. You don't have them both going like this because it's a big loop. They go so fast and they don't stop as they can complete a circuit very quickly. So,
all right, well, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of things like how fast it does go, things like that. But I think at this point it might be useful to run this little video that you brought, Ron.
Okay,
that
sure.
Sort of shows people what we're talking about here, because we've been describing it, but nothing beats the image. It's
picture's worth 1,000 words.
1,000 spoken words. So if we could have this video, we'll show some of it here. You guys can describe what we're looking at, Ron.
Well, one thing I want to show is that construction can be very rapid. Now, obviously, this is a caricature of a real machine, which we used in one of our recent solar installations. And so this is a bit of an exaggeration, but robots are available for installing solar arrays, as you see here. So we believe that the construction, in fact, can go very rapidly in the community. Now, once you have it up and running here, you can see the vehicle doesn't really have that much of a visual impact compared to what you had with the old-fashioned trains. And furthermore, there is a much greater tendency to get the noise factor way down compared to what you had back in the old days, back in the, you say the elevator, in Chicago,
in New York, sure.
In New York. So these things really make a huge difference in how we go about this. So one of the key things is that we don't want to see the freeway as an obstacle, but really the freeway, and for that matter, tall high-rise buildings, do interfere with our view of the mountains, and we accept that. So I think that once people get adjusted to this, they'll realize that a three-dimensional city has one really important attribute, and that is it liberates the streets again for pedestrians, for bicyclists. And that is the other factor that, yes, in the beginning people will wonder, well, what is this three-dimensional transportation system? But it's the liberating factor that I think will ultimately draw people to it.
Okay, well, now, in this video that we just saw, those pods were coming by once every couple of seconds, 3-5 seconds, I don't know what they were.
Yeah.
Is that realistic? Is that what you're talking about here?
The fellow who was the head of research and development at BART designed one of these systems back in the 70s. And he's now working on controls, and he, amongst many others, are working to really move this to a much higher level of throughput. And the key to that is getting the intervals between cars down to less than what it would be required. Right now in the state of California, you have to have a 3-second interval. But we think that we can get down to about a second interval.
Okay, well, let's say a
1
second,
interval.
and typically you'll have one, it's going to be like the highway. Let's say you have 1.2 people in each one.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so it's 60, 80 people per minute. Okay, if you're talking about people going to Google, right, per hour, that's 500 people an hour. No, that's not. More like 5,000 people an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
5,000
about what
people an hour.
SkyTran is working out to, is about 5,000 an hour.
5,000
It's
an hour.
not too shabby.
No, 5,000 an hour. I was going to say, because mass transit has to be mass transit.
Okay, but remember one thing. We're not talking about line haul here. Going over to the Google campus from the train, there could be people coming from 2 or 3 different train stops, going in this mesh that I was describing, a network, not a single corridor. And people are not all going to the same place at the other side.
Right.
So there's many stations. And as you'll see if you want to come down and see our project at San Jose State, a group of industrial design students there just finished a project and displayed it over last weekend. Their station design looks a whole lot like a bus stop. It doesn't have to be like Millbrae BART station.
Right.
And train where they two join together.
Not a
That's
huge infrastructure
huge,
project.
That's a multi-million-dollar facility. Whereas we can design a station right in the second floor lobby of your office building or in your hotel. And if you're running a hotel, you're going to be so glad that people can show up there. There's no fumes where the van is sitting outside there with the noise and all that. Come right in. You have security inside the lobby of that building. There are many advantages to this that just multiply as you get deeper and deeper into it.
But if you
it's
have
phenomenal.
short station platforms, as you described
yeah.
there, that means you can't have cars backing up. I mean, the people that are
In
behind the
that
guys
scenario-
here, they can't get off.
In that particular, there are station models though where the car comes in and then backs into stalls. So you would have maybe a series of 5 stalls,
Or as many as you need.
or you have series. So they come in this way, and you've got a platform like Union Station or something, where you have 5 different lines of vehicles coming in, and you're just boarding 2 or 3 right there. So
think of this table as a stadium, a ball stadium, sports stadium. You could have 30 stations, one at each place where the stairs go, all the way around. And if I want to get off there, I can get off there, and the people that don't want to stop there, they keep moving. So it can be changed from one focal point. Right now, if you're in any major city, they have the central station. And this place has 100,000 people or more going through there every day. It's nuts. Because I want to go from there over to there, but I have to go all the way down here, all the way back, and all along with all those other people have to do that. But with this much, much cheaper, and we're talking about an order of magnitude cheaper than light rail or, underground, metro.
Heavy rail.
Yeah, heavy rail. So with that order of magnitude improvement in cost, I can have lines that go across town, not just into the center of
Do you
town.
really envision that? I mean,
Yeah,
how diffuse
absolutely.
is this network? Because if it isn't very diffuse, if we're talking about a couple of lines that connect, the
It's
corridors
gotta
we
be
were
a
talking about
network.
easier. If it isn't a network, then I still have to drive to get to this thing, right?
But
so that defeats the purpose.
If it is a network, that network is robust and diffuse enough or broad enough that I don't have very far to go to get to my destination, my starting point. And I don't have to, when I get to the end, I don't have to go very far. I can walk at either end. And I can abandon the car that goes off and picks up somebody else instead of having to search around for 15 minutes to find a parking place.
Right.
It's so much easier.
And of course, we're talking about, there's early stage network
Right.
and end stage network, where you've really got a robust system as opposed to like the starter line.
Yeah, we've
And
got
so
a long ways to go.
Yeah, I
before
mean,
we get to what I was
New York
describing.
City subway started out with a line.
Yes. Yes.
So-
No, I understand that. But let me say something else about sort of the end game here,
Yeah.
where you have a diffuse enough network that you really can walk to your local pod station. I mean, obviously this works better where you have high density
Right.
housing and that sort of thing, but that's true of all public transportation. But one of the things that has to be considered in transportation, the number of units that you've got out there, all right? Since these guys carry a couple of people, right, you've got to have a lot of them. And maybe in a big system like this, you'd have thousands of these
One would
pods,
think, sure.
right?
Exactly.
Of course.
Now, an airline, serving the entire world might have thousands of planes, but, in general, if they're only serving a small part of the country, they'll have hundreds of planes. Railroads, again, there might be hundreds of train sets, usually fewer. Caltrain doesn't have hundreds of train sets. That means that their maintenance is of a very small number of units, whereas here you've got a very large number of units. Does this present a problem that you have to make sure, because all these things have to work. If one of them stops in the middle of the guideway, everything behind it has a problem.
Well, not as bad as it would be with BART, because since this is a network, I can reroute the traffic around that obstacle, which you can't do with the systems that are in place now.
Yes.
And all of the system elements are of equal capacity. Now, one thing to remember is that out in the suburbs, in the distant side of the system, there won't be that much congestion because of fewer coming together. When you get to the center of this thing, where you have a major thoroughfare, the difference is not that you have more lanes. We don't do this by more and more lanes. We do it by bringing the cars closer and closer together. Even can be platooning where they're maybe just an inch or two apart. Some people have thought that that's possible. I think they're right. I think it can be done.
What about the maintenance issue, though?
Well, okay, but in that regard, the difference is that in this case we have a competent group of people always watching out for these things and always doing that maintenance on a regular basis. You have an automobile on this freeway right here, and you don't know whether the guy did change his oil last week or 10 years ago. You know, you have no control over that. So I think that when you look at performance, what you want is a fleet of well-maintained vehicles. And yes, it's going to cost something for maintenance, but don't forget, that vehicle doesn't get used once a day and sits there 8 hours in the hot sun and then gets turned on for 10 minutes or an hour to take you home. This thing is busy all the time. The maintenance on jet airplanes is high. Why? Because they're in the air all the time. And the maintenance on these things is going to be high, but they're going to be used 20 and 40 times a day.
You say in the
you spread that maintenance cost over a lot of people that way.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, the higher utilization always lowers the cost, but I'm
There
just
you go.
thinking that there are a lot of moving parts here.
Oh boy.
Okay.
There are.
You bet.
You mentioned the hot sun. I know that you, Ron, would love to see the top of this guideway covered with solar cells.
Absolutely.
Does that really help?
Well, it's certainly going to help us because Silicon Valley is also silicon energy. You know, that's how we have made a huge impact. Some of the most important technology in the solar world is coming from this valley right here. SunPower is a Sunnyvale company in its origins, and now it's down in San Jose. They have the most efficient solar panels in the industry, in the commercial industry. Next to Lockheed Martin, by the way, which has more efficient, but they use them for satellites because they're more expensive.
Right.
But the thing is that we can either continue to use Saudi Arabia carbon or Kentucky carbon or West Virginia carbon or Texas carbon,
about
or we can
Wyoming
have
carbon?
Silicon Valley silicon energy. Now, if we have really two possibilities here. We are either going to be buying this technology in the future, this transportation system, or we're going to be selling it. If we want to sell it, it's got to be based on silicon energy, not on Texas energy.
Well, listen.
Well, and there's another part to it too. Specifically with the SkyTrans system, is they've revised sort of their guideway model, and it's now sort of got this covered honeycomb, which is where the solar panels go.
Absolutely.
That serves a secondary purpose to shade the vehicles, which most of the vehicle designs have a fair amount of glass. They will be air conditioned, but the solar energy into the vehicles is really a lot if you've just been in a car in the sun.
Right on.
So having the solar shading serves a secondary purpose to shade that. But some of the people that have been looking at this said you actually could make money just from the energy created. Is sort of like a power purchase agreement.
Well,
with the amount of power with a network like
With
that.
a system 4 meters wide, we can get a megawatt a mile. I would love to put up a megawatt a mile with my solar company.
Yeah,
And I
what
think
is
we
the
could-
efficiency of your solar cells to get a megawatt a mile?
I said 4 meters wide.
No, but I mean, are they 10%
20%,
efficient?
no, that's 20% efficient solar, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But there's a company here locally that has cells which are close to 30% efficient. So we can shrink this array. And furthermore, we don't need a megawatt a mile because these vehicles do not require 400 horsepower. That's the other factor.
yeah. Well, a megawatt a mile is,
That's
it's
a
like
lot.
1,000 horsepower, something like that a mile.
But that'll be divided up a lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
And it's-
Well, if they have 1 second headways, I don't think you got enough energy. But you know, and at night you're going to have to buy the energy anyhow, right? You're not going to store it somehow.
Right.
Well, down the road we will, but not
yeah.
in the beginning. No.
It also depends on the type of propulsion that you're doing.
Right.
You know, we're now up to the third stage of or third generation of PRT. There's the original one, which is sort of like the West Virginia one, wheel mounted, or there's second generation, which has got sort of like electric motors in the truck. And there's a third stage now, which is again being developed over at SkyTran, and they're actually using passive maglev, with aluminum rails, and you get your eddy current, and it's amazing to see the thing fly down the guideway. Literally, no wheels, just riding on a magnetic cushion,
Yeah.
and the propulsion is magnetic as well through the drive tube, and it's fascinating. But it's not like the maglev that they're trying to do in China or down in Las Vegas, which is this highly energized. This is just because it's moving, it creates the eddy current. Something you probably know way more about than I do.
Well, that brings me to a point, because maglev has been talked about at least for 30 years,
Right.
that I know about, probably a lot longer. And yet, there aren't too many real installations of magnet. There's some what you might call demo
Right.
systems. What's the story here? Has anybody done this? Have they, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that the city council wanted to say, look, let's see it in action somewhere else. Maybe we shouldn't be the guinea pigs. Are there any other pigs out there?
Well, what will happen if we take that approach is we'll become buyers rather than sellers. Now, my family back in the 1950s and 60s built the Ford Motor Plant. Today, that is the Great Mall. We went from production to consumption. Now, if we want to have something productive here, if we want to be in the global marketplace, we have to have something to offer. And it's not just about making another gadget you can pull off a shelf, but there's also the need for infrastructure innovation. And infrastructure innovation is team sport, just like venture capital is team sport. It takes industry, it takes government, and it takes academia. We have to bring all of these players together to get this right. And that's just a very different way than it is the kind of innovation we're used to here. If we sit on the sidelines, we will be buying from somebody overseas.
Yeah, you're already working on getting partners in this. I think Google has shown some
Right.
interest. And
Google has, we've talked with others. You can see a real practical application. Is sort of going back to the route structure for a second. Obviously trying to connect the Caltrain station to the Google campus. One of the problems that we're having, and sort of the North Bayshore is kind of the perfect storm for this, because even though Google has got about a 40% diversion rate out of single cars, they're still bringing in 15 to 20,000 cars a day. One of the concepts that they've also talked is having like an intercept parking garage. So people would drive in there, you'd park there, the buses, all of the Google shuttles would come down, drop off there, but instead of driving around the North Bayshore campus, you'd have, this PRT system that's elevated. Because one of the things that's great about Google is all their bikes.
I was just
But if
gonna
you've
say.
tried to drive through the North Bayshore or all those bikes, guess who don't follow the rules? The bikes.
I'm really surprised to hear that, Mike. Well, listen, we're getting close to the end here. I'm just going to be...
Really?
I'm going to... Only of the show. I want to be provocative here, though. and that is to suggest, look, the idea of personalized transit, that's something that, modern digital technology, digital electronics, computers, that makes that much more practical than it would have been, say, 3 decades ago.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, why not just have, very quickly, why not just have the self-driving car? Because then the roadway's already in place.
Because as long as there's a human driving a car, automated systems will foul up.
Having the human in the car is a problem. Ron,
It's
what's the
still
problem?
on the ground. We want to put the ground back to work for humans. We're fighting against the machine all the time. And we have 30,000 accidents in the United States, 1 million accidents worldwide, deaths worldwide every year. So the key to this thing is getting above the ground.
All right. I want to thank my guests, Ron Swenson, Mike Kasperzak. I'm Seth Shostak. This has been Silicon Valley Buzz. Man, I'm so excited about this. We'll look for you next time.